So what are the causes of inflation right now? Well, I'd actually say it's two things. So let's take things on a macro level. Let's face it, we got really tired of being pent up for 2 years on COVID. So I think first off, we were able to, because we did, we had to change our whole lives and spend a lot more time at home. We're able to save up a lot more money and honestly get a little stir crazy. If you've been to an airport this summer or try to do any sort of traveling, it's a mob scene everywhere you go. So I think first thing obviously is pent up demand. Secondly, not to get political, but I think a lot of money has just been pumped into the system by the government. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but whenever you do that, prices tend to go up. So that's kind of on a macro level. But then if we're going to pull it down back to a micro level, inflation kind of has a way to almost become self-perpetuating. And what I mean by that is that as companies get used to raising wages and prices on a regular basis, it's very easy to just kind of get into a routine of having regular price increases and wages increases, which tend to make the tail on inflation go longer. So I think it's both a macro thing and a micro, but I think a lot of it that we're experiencing today is due to the pandemic and some of our responses to that. I think we all feel it to some degrees, but I think you're right. I think some feel it a lot more than others. I would think that the businesses that have really high cost of goods sold or really high labor costs would be the ones that most hit. So if you're in transportation, like trucking, you're paying a driver to drive a truck across the country, or manufacturing where you have to buy a lot of commodities and use labor to create that final product, or even some white collar professional businesses like consulting, or like our business, digital marketing. When we're seeing the salaries and wages go up, we get impacted by that. Some companies that are less impacted by inflation are ones that have low cost of goods sold. Like, software companies have to spend a lot of money developing the software, but once it's developed, their cost of goods is almost zero. So I think we're all affected to a certain level. It's just some markets more than others. I can see it two ways. I think the first thing you're going to see is businesses are going to have a greater need for business loans and lines of credit. I mean, think about it. If your cost around, if you have to buy a bunch of commodities or raw materials for your business, if those have gone up, your need for capital to purchase those also goes up. So I think you're going to see a greater need for these business loans and lines of credit. And then on the other side, and again, I'm not a lender, but I could see lenders becoming more stringent about their requirements because, you're now coming to them. Let's say you were, borrowing $1 million, and now you're wanting to borrow $2 million or $3 million because your cost of goods sold or your raw materials have gone up. Well, now that's a riskier loan on the part of the lender. So I think companies that have that are going to be able to do it, companies that have good credit ratings, that have long histories of paying back whoever their creditors are, and have had in-place lines of credit. Where I worry about is companies that don't already have that established, that they have not ever tapped into a line of credit or a loan before, and now all of a sudden they're needing this, for their business. I think they're the ones that are going to really struggle here. Well, first off, let's start with a basic thing. We will always have some level of inflation. I mean, even over the last 10 years, we had inflation. Now, you usually ran about 2%. I understand this is desirable. Like the government and the Federal Reserve want us to have a little bit of inflation each year because it allows people to get raises. It helps the economy run. So the question, I don't think it's like when will we stop having inflation? I think we're always going to have it at some point, at some level. Now, hopefully not at the 9% level. Hopefully the real question is when will it go back down to the 2% level? I think it's going to be a couple of things. I think the first thing is that, like I said, I used travel as an example earlier today. I mean, everyone's just going wild with the vacations. Well, guess what? School is starting up. So I think you're going to see some of that going, I'm not saying that desire for travel is going to go away, but that some of that pent up demand, I think, is being released through the system. It's kind of like having a valve and some of the steam is sort of coming out. I think the second thing that will happen is just the way the government is responding. I mean, they continue to raise interest rates, and when you raise interest rates, it makes it more expensive for businesses to be able to finance new projects. Which in turn, I mean, without going too far down the road, which tends to tamper back inflation. So I think I guess what I'm saying is some of the natural steam which will be let go, from some of this pent up demand, and then also some of the macro changes that are going into play. I expect it to calm down here in the next, now is it 3 months, 6 months, 8 months? I don't know, but I do expect it to get back down to that 2% level. First one is to prepare. And what I mean by that is, ask yourself in your industry, whatever it is, how will my customers respond to inflation, or you can even ask, or to a slowing economy? I know we're talking about inflation today, but how are my customers going to react? Specifically, are they going to start caring about different things? So, for example, are they, becoming super price sensitive, or do they care a lot more about, do you offer them, what sort of terms do you offer them when they purchase for you? And the reason why I say ask yourself is because you may need to make some adjustments, either to your product offering, to some of your marketing messages, or even the way you deliver some of your products. And again, it's going to be very industry specific, but I always like to say, we always talk about at our company, and I work for a company called Uncommon Logic. We're a digital marketing ad agency. One of our principles is we call it WIFM, what's in it for me? And that's what your customers are constantly asking. And so what I would really say is when I say prepare, think about not necessarily what this means for you, but what does inflation and a changing economy mean for your customers, and how will that change the things that they care about, and what adjustments can you make? The second thing, along with prepare, would be measure. And what I mean by that is that so you come up with some hypotheses on what your customers may care more about, but make sure you're measuring to see if those changes are actually happening. And so if you think that your customers may care more about one thing versus another, well, actually, try it, run some tests and see if they're actually responding to that new offering or whatever. So prepare and measure would be my two things just off the top of my head. I live here in Austin, Texas. And I will say one thing that people in Texas are terrible at is driving in snow. Because you have one of two things. You have the person that is so panicked when they're driving in snow that they go down the road at 2 miles an hour. And, they're just so panicked that they're going to end up in a ditch. They actually make things more dangerous because they're going so slow. The other extreme is the denier, the snow deniers. Man, they're still going 80 miles an hour down the highway, in their truck or whatever vehicle they're at. They're just ignoring it altogether. I think being on either extreme is the worst ways a business could respond. I do think you need to prepare. So you can't be a denier that inflation is here. But I think the worst thing you can do is panic. And I see some companies right now panicking and just saying, we're going to slash our marketing spend way back. Now, mind you, these are marketing activities where they are seeing, again, I'm in the digital marketing world. So one advantage that we have is for a lot of the marketing investments we make on behalf of our clients, they have a direct line of sight on return on investment. And even though these activities are having a return on investment, companies are still looking to scale them back, even though that return is there. And I would argue that they're hurting themselves in the long run. By the way, I'm not saying, look, if you have a marketing tactic or a business, something that practice that you're doing, and all of a sudden it's not working, I'm not saying don't cut it back then. That's being prudent. But panicking is cutting back before you start seeing the bad results. And the second thing I see along with the panicking is companies that stop experimenting. Again, my world is digital marketing, and one of the things that I've learned is in order to do well, you always want to be trying new things, different messages, different channels, different ad types, etc. Because if you don't continue to do that, your efforts tend to get stale. And where I think I see companies making a mistake is they stop their experiments, they cut back some of their spend, and they just do the same stuff that has always been successful at a smaller scale. And I think there's going to be a cost to that. I think they're giving up growth today, but I think they're also giving up future growth tomorrow because they aren't learning those new tactics or techniques to help them grow. And of having some loose contingency plans. For example, if our revenue hits this level, then we will hire X more people. Or if we get these 2 deals, then we will do this. Or if revenue flatlines, meaning if we don't get these customers, then we will make these changes. I think if you can do that ahead of time and set, milestones out in the future. So saying, look, if in 3 months, if our revenue is at this point, then we're going to make these changes to our business. If you can set it far enough in advance, then I think it takes some of the emotion. Because I can tell you, one of the mistakes I always make is I can always justify whatever decision I want. I just need that one more client or that one more deal, or, if this is going to come through. But if the nice part about it, if there's some time separation, you can set some goals and by the way, I would set very reasonable goals or contingencies. And then it's a lot easier than in 3 months to say, hey, we're way above that goal. Let's go ahead and make these changes. Or, wow, we're way under that goal. We need to make, Y changes, that sort of thing. It's a little bit easier to be able to make those decisions if you've set those goals ahead of time. And like you said, we're halfway through the year. And for some people, their year has been a blowout. Has been great. For others, it's not. And so I think now is a good time to kind of take a step back and say, okay, where are we? What changes do we need to make? And let's set some milestones for the rest of the year.
That's great advice. Really practical, very practical. I love that. What do you think are some of the best ways to cut costs and still grow right now?
Wow. Okay. Well, my first question is why are you looking to cut costs? If you are, some companies, there's, I call it hibernating for winter. There are sometimes what companies need to do is they just need to hibernate. And what I mean by that is they want to just kind of, it's kind of the live to play another day sort of a thing. And if you're really in a market where you think you need to hibernate for winter, in that case, you're not really looking to grow. You're really looking just to maintain your core team, customers, revenue, and just kind of run out the clock because you think something's going to change in the future. But if your goal is really to grow, well, so in some cases you can cut costs. I'll talk about that in a second. But in others, you may need to actually invest more. But the question I have here, and this may not be popular to ask, but if you want to cut costs and still grow, my question for you is what things in your business can you utilize technology to replace things that people are currently doing for you? And I'll tell you a story. A couple of months ago, my family were driving down to Houston, Texas, and we were stopping at a McDonald's. And on the sign of McDonald's, it wasn't talking about the latest Big Mac. They were talking about how you could get a job there for $18 an hour, which is just, I mean, it's a lot of money, and that's great. However, when I went inside, and it had been a while since I'd been in McDonald's, there was one cash register in the store, and there was no one behind it. If you wanted food at that McDonald's, you had to go up to a kiosk and put your order in there in the kiosk. And so what happens is that you can imagine, I don't know what the minimum wage is in the US. I know it was passed eons ago, but the McDonald's is paying $18 an hour, which is great, but they probably have a lot fewer people in the stores because they're leveraging technology. So they don't have the 6 cash registers with 6 people standing behind them waiting to take your order. They're using technology in this case to replace a person. So this is allowing them to cut costs, and hopefully, and in this case, this is not a growth story, but for your business, what are things where you could use technology to replace things that people are doing? Because technology can do it faster and cheaper than what people can. That's why in the trucking industry, there's so much money being pushed towards the self-driving trucks. I think that's you're gonna, I think that's an area where you're gonna, I don't know when it's gonna be, but there's a lot of incentive for stuff like that. Sort of. I think the overall slowing of the economy is affecting hiring more than inflation right now. Yes, talent is a lot more expensive now, but demand is down. So again, this is a data point of one, but I can tell you for our business, we are seeing a lot more applications for our open positions than what we had even 6 months ago. Now, what's interesting is we also have fewer open positions because we've gone through some of this whole planning that we've talked about, and we've scaled back some of our goals. Unless we hit certain revenue goals, then we'll put those hires, back on the board. So I think there is, I mean, it's a mixed bag. I mean, I think it is an opportunity for businesses to have a better chance of finding talent than what it's been for the last 2 years. But I mean, there's a saying, I don't know what it is, and I'm gonna do something you're not supposed to do, is kind of make up a statistic on the spot. But there's like a saying that the cost to acquire a new customer, it's 7 times more than keeping an existing customer. I think the same thing applies to talent and team members. There is a pretty big cost of getting someone new into a role. And the cost is not just the time of a recruiting team or technology or your ad spending on Indeed. It's even getting that person, once they start, getting them up that learning curve. So I think there's another, and where this is all going is, everyone's talked about the great resignation that we've been through the last couple of years with people switching jobs and et cetera. I think with the slowing down of the economy, and I think you're going to see less job hopping, first of all, because there's going to be fewer opportunities out there. I think it's also, and it could be a really good thing for companies because, I think the real benefit that you get from people on your team is there's a learning curve no matter what position it is. And when you get over that 6 months, 1 year sort of part of the curve, I think the what a prospective team member or what a team member delivers goes up dramatically. And so I guess my message is this is a convoluted way of saying there's an opportunity to acquire some of the talent that's been hard to find. But I also think there's an opportunity for companies to double down on their current team and get them over that 1 to 2 year hump and get a lot more out of the team that they have.